Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk a little bit about Part 4 of the IB English Language A, Language and Literature Syllabus. This is focused on HL, but it certainly works for SL students as well. As a part of this, we will take a look today at Christina Rosetti's Uphill. It's a poem in particular, so we can take a look at structure in poetry and any kind of text, really, language, device, and all of this in order to analyze the Ematic Purpose, which is really what we're after when we're doing pure critical study like we are in Part 4. So just to be clear, let's make sure that we know what the assessment objectives from the IB we're looking at. In particular, under knowledge and understanding, these two, demonstrating knowledge and understanding of a range of text, and demonstrating an understanding of the use of language, structure, technique, and style. That will be a focus. Obviously, with application and analysis, we're going to demonstrate an ability to use terminology relevant to the various text type studies. So we'll be looking at terminology for poetry. Luckily, some of that terminology actually works for things like fiction and nonfiction as well. This will begin to look at, especially as we talk about theme, demonstrating an ability to analyze the effects of language, structure, technique, and style on the reader. As we start to uncover theme, that is the understanding that the reader is meant to walk away with. And that'll help us write about the effect on the reader without saying the reader may feel over and over again. It's a bit more of a subtle and complex approach. And then with synthesis and evaluation, discuss the different ways in which language and image may be used in a range of text, and then demonstrate an ability to evaluate conflicting viewpoints within and about a text. We'll begin to address that today, and this will be a focus. You may want to take a moment right now to scroll down to the bottom of the page and follow the link so you can read the poem before we get started, or you can have a look at the poem right now. So this is our poem, Uphill by Christina Rosetti. We're going to take a focus just on the text right now. There are other ways of learning about text, and particularly in Part 3 as we think about texts in context. So a lot of that becomes important. For today's practice, we're going to kind of ignore that and just take a look at the text itself and get into what the text can tell us. There are a variety of ways of reading text. We've got feminist criticism, or Marxist criticism, or Marxist feminist criticism, new criticism, or structuralism, historical criticism, social criticism. There's a lot of different ways of reading, and this list goes on and on, reading text. We're going to take this approach today. It's sort of the new critical structuralist approach, and this is something you can use for Part 3 if you know that terminology. But if you haven't taken a minute to read the poem at the link below, just take a minute right now and read this poem here on the screen. Now, what I'm going to do is take a minute, read it myself, and annotate it. My suggestion is that you're annotating, marking text as you read, noticing the things that seem to be important, and in particular, what we're going to be focusing on. So I'm going to be looking for an identification of the speaker. Speaker in a poem is like the narrator in a poem or in a story. The speaker is the voice. The subject, what is it about on the literal level? Tone. What is the relationship of the speaker to the subject? And I'll get more into that later. Structure. Is there anything I can notice about the way the poem is just on the page, is written, is organized? Can I identify literary devices, poetic devices, and the effect of those choices? That, if you can identify a metaphor, fantastic. Can't say what that metaphor means or how it advances the meaning of the poem. It's not that important, so skip it, or try to figure it out. And ultimately, we're trying to get down here and recognize the thematic purpose of the artist in creating this piece. So I'll take a minute and just read the poem. So I've taken a few moments to read and annotate the poem. I noticed that it's about a road throughout. It's about travel, the day's journey. Will it take the whole long day from morn to night? My friend. Well, what is going on with these questions and periods? It seems like call and response are almost question and answer. One person is asking the question at first, another person is answering. It's a really interesting structure when you think about speaker. It's like there are two narrators that are telling us what's going on in the poem. We're listening in on a conversation, one that is completely question and answer, call and response. The day's journey ends at night. There's an inn that you will arrive at in the night. You can't miss it. You will meet other wayfarers there, those who have gone before you. How do I get in? Don't worry about it. They will not keep you standing there. That's the admission to this inn. Shall I find comfort? Travel sore and weak. Well, this is a uphill journey the whole way. Does it go uphill the whole way? Yes, to the very end. I don't know if you're a hiker, but that sounds tiring to me. But of labor you shall find the sum. That's an interesting statement. We'll have to come back to that. But there is beds for all, and there will be rest at the end of the day. Okay, so what do I notice as I look here? Well, immediately, the punctuation, the structure of call and response, this idea of the road and traveling throughout. I notice there's a rhyme scheme. In each stanza, the contiguous piece of text as a stanza. In each stanza, there are 2 questions, 2 answers. The answers rhyme, the questions rhyme. Okay, so I'm starting to notice some things. I should probably jot these down. So let's start with speaker. What have I noticed about speaker? As we think about the speaker here, really there are 2. There's a questioner and an answer. The questioner is asking questions about the subject. The person who's responding is answering about the subject. The person who's responding seems to know an awful lot about this journey, so one must imagine that either they have done it themselves or they know an awful lot about everything. And what do we call someone who knows an awful lot about everything? An English teacher? Well, there's a better term. This second speaker seems to be omniscient. What a know-it-all. Maybe even, one of the words we hear a lot when we study literature is godlike for omniscient. And there may be something to that. So then what is the subject? What is this poem actually about? Well, think about it for a moment, and I'll give you my answer. If I was going to focus on a subject in a very literal manner, it would be the day's journey, a day's journey, and the journey's end. This is really, on a very literal level, what this poem is about. What's going to happen on the journey, what will it be like, how will it end, and there's quite a focus on how it ends. What about the tone? Now, let me give you a little graphic organizer here. Now, don't worry, you're not being indoctrinated into a secret cult. We need to label this diagram, and then it will become useful to us. Now, I did not create or design this concept, but it is a really useful concept for all of us to use to understand text. This new rhetorical triangle of speaker, audience, and subject, surrounded by, embedded within a cultural context, which is a big focus of Part 3, but we don't necessarily need to focus on that all the time, as we don't in Part 4, is a way of beginning to dig in and understand text. So when we think about the speaker, well, there's really 2 of them, question and answer. And here's a subject, day's journey, and the journey's end. So when we fill this in quick on the diagram, see we have our speakers and our subject down here, and we can start to think about tone. And tone I describe as a relationship of the speaker to the subject matter. If you think about these 2 speakers, how does each of them look at this journey differently? What is the role of each? How would you describe tone of each speaker towards this subject, the day's journey and the journey's end? Take a minute, think about it, and I'll explain to you how I would respond. If I was going to describe the tone of the questioner, I would say concerned, worried, a bit unsure of what's to come. And the responder, the person with the answers, speaker with the answers, is reassuring but frank, very honest. So if we look at this list now, we've got a pretty good start here. I can explain tone, or describe it at least. And with the structure, it is question or answer, call and response, and the rhyme scheme supports that, as we pointed out, and there are 4 stanzas for whatever that's worth. We're probably getting well on the way towards thinking about main idea or theme here with these 2 speakers, and the fact that one is worried and the other is but reassuring, has the information. This is the subject of today's journey. The next thing we think about is what devices are at play and what is the effect of these devices. And then, of course, we can move towards integrating all this to understanding thematic purpose. If we look at this, ultimately, if there's one major device that's being used here, it's this image of the road. The road winds uphill. It ends in a resting place, an inn. So really we have the road and this inn in which there's comfort for everybody, beds for everyone who shows up. There's a roof there. What do we call that metaphor that works its way through the entire piece? This device is called an extended metaphor, or conceit. An extended metaphor is present from beginning to end or throughout a large portion of a piece, and in this case, it is the road, and the road winding up in this inn. Okay, so, well, that's something. But why? What's the effect of this? Well, again, the speaker who's asking questions is worried about the trip, worried about finding a safe place at the end to rest. The responder has the knowledge that, yes, this is going to be a hard journey. It's uphill the whole way, and it takes the entire day. And it sounds troublesome. But is there for night a resting place? A roof for when the slow, dark hours begin. Don't worry, you can't miss it. You'll meet others who've gone before, and they'll let you in. And there are beds for everyone who come, and still this interesting line of labor you shall find the sun that we need to dig into. So what's the effect of the extended metaphor? Again, give it a second, think about it. How would you describe that? And then I'll tell you what I think. So what is the effect of the extended metaphor? Well, now I have to use descriptive language myself to really get into it at all. If I am very pat and obvious, I'm not going to get into it. Well, there's a road and it's hard and there's a place at the end. Well, no, let's describe it a bit. The road is long and difficult. There is rest and companionship at the end for all. And I have to go back now here and deal with this because the rest of it is pretty obvious. Of labor you shall find the sun. The sum of our labor on the voyage determines the degree of our comfort in the inn, our final resting place. And you can start to see how the extended metaphor really makes the thematic purpose pretty obvious. We can hardly describe the journey and the end of the journey without using terms like final resting place. which of course is another way of describing the grave or death, or the afterlife, if you will. So then what is the thematic purpose? Like, what's the point here? Well, that's up to you. That's where the analysis really digs in. For me, I think that this poem is a nice quasi-religious look at life for everybody, the laborer, as well as perhaps the burgeoning middle class and upper class at the time it was written. I think life is difficult for everybody. It's difficult the entire time, but don't worry, because there are others who are doing it too. We will reach the end. Everybody dies, and the work that we put in during life will be directly correlated to the degree to which we get rest at the end. And that's not something that I necessarily subscribe to, but I can see the power of the idea. So how do we describe that thematic purpose? Well, think about it for a moment, and I think I'll show you what I can do. So this is how I would describe the thematic purpose. The author is examining the difficulty of life and the reward of rest at the end of life. It's a powerful statement of values here. This relationship between our comfort at the end of life and the sum of our labor during life's journey. A life of leisure won't lead to eternal rest, but honest labor will. Easy for her to say. One imagines what a Marxist criticism of that poem may say. But at the end of the day, I think that is part of what's going on here. That's at least an arguable meaning. Who knows? Who knows if the questioner would even agree with that? They seem worried about, does the road wind up all the way? Are we almost there yet? They're not very excited about this labor, but the answerer is giving that labor. If the answerer is God, is a pretty intense statement. The answer, maybe if the responder is just a person who's done it before, well, there's a whole other way of looking at it. We start to get into reader response here in a more part 3 viewpoint, in which, like, how are we reading this poem? What are our values? What are the values of the time, and can we identify anything going on there? There's always things like Wikipedia that give us a partial, generally misguided understanding. I would not recommend trying to understand a poem through the lens of, for example, Christina Rosetti's Wikipedia page, or maybe something about the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood of which she was a part. I would avoid it. I think, especially as I think about part 4, it's all about the text. So what we did is had a look at a text, poetry, a poem, looked at language, structure, technique, and style, the extended metaphor, structure of call and response, which, the punctuation and the rhyme scheme underlie. We're looking at terminology relevant to poetry. Speaker, for example. That also works with nonfiction. This nifty little diagram here is absolutely perfect for nonfiction as well. Works for fiction too. We looked at the way in which language and image is used in this poem, particularly looking at the extended metaphor or conceit, and looked at some conflicting viewpoints within the text, just starting to look at how might those two speakers view that theme that I identified differently. It doesn't take much to imagine what, for example, a Holocaust victim felt walking through the gates of Auschwitz. Work will set you free. That seems to be part of the message here. Now, I'm not calling Christina Rosetti a Nazi, but there's different ways of looking at that message. Is it all negative? No. It's a powerful message that what we do in life matters, so pay attention to that, not so much the end. Don't worry, it'll happen. But there are other ways of viewing that. At any rate, right, we got to a theme, and that is one way in which we can use some of these terms like speaker, subject, tone, device to uncover what's going on in a poem. Thanks for checking us out, and have a look at some of the other videos. In particular, we'll be looking at other part 4, some fiction, some drama, to start to get a sense of different ways of using this, and then obviously in the part 3, different ways in which context can affect some of the pieces.